Hello, my name is HAPruitt and I am the author of Anelthalien, and in this video I'm going to talk about editing when going through the self-publishing process. So if you're self-publishing, you're probably going to be your own editor unless you hire an editor. If you hire an editor, that's great, then you may not need this video. But if you're doing it on your own, I'm going to share some tips about how to go about editing. And this is not based on any kind of professional advice. This is my experience. So I'm not guaranteeing that you'll have a perfect book if you follow this advice. Just some helpful tips. So when editing, when you're talking about editing, you're basically talking about one of two things. Either you're talking about what to keep in your story or what to take out, or you're talking about the grammar, the syntax, the tense, the spelling, and different aspects of just the words. So first, we'll address what to keep in your story or what to take out. I have to tell you that in Anelthalien, I do not do this type of editing. I write in my notebooks whatever God tells me to write, and then I type it, and what is in the story doesn't change. The content does not change. But in all my other writings that I've ever done, I do this, and I also look at other people have asked me to look at their papers and help them do this because I really am pretty nerdy and enjoyed this in high school and college, editing and seeing what to keep in and what to take out, how to make it better, how to make it more concise. And so even though I didn't do it with the book that I have published, I know how to do this. Alright, so what to edit out. Edit out anything that is redundant. Any redundant words, ideas, or scenes. If you made the point one way already, don't think you have to keep making it. Unless like you're really trying to make a point and use repetition, redundancy isn't repetition. So if you're just using multiple adjectives that mean the same thing and you're not trying to really hammer it in, take out those redundant things because they just overwhelm people. It's just too much. It'll just feel like you're really trying to hammer them over the head. And nobody wants that. Readers are intelligent. Readers want to figure it out for themselves. And if you act like they're children, they're just gonna get tired of it. So take out anything that feels redundant or anything that is redundant. Edit out anything that doesn't add to the overall gist of what you're trying to say. In fiction a lot, we put in scenes that we just like because we like our characters, you know. I don't have any examples from my book, but I've heard people authors I follow on Instagram say, oh, I had to edit out this part and I put it in and it really just, I really like it and I like it about my character, but they can't say more than, I just like it. And I like what it says about my character. It doesn't add to their story. And so if you have any parts in your book like that, parts that you just really, really, really like, but they don't really help convey your point. I know I did that a lot in my essays in high school. I would put in parts, just sentences that sounded really nice or really cool, and I just really liked them, and they just sounded really good, but they weren't really necessary. And my teacher always made me edit them out, but she was right. So if you just like it, but it doesn't add anything to your story, it doesn't convey your point, what you're trying to get at, your theme, go ahead and edit that part out. Alright. Also, edit out if it distracts from your main purpose or if it goes off on another purpose. If you're writing a book, you have a goal, even if it's fiction. Even if it's fiction, you have a main goal that you're trying to accomplish. And so if you just start putting in scenes or putting in paragraphs about just different things, you know, like, oh, my characters also did this and it was a great time, but it doesn't add to your story. It doesn't move the plot forward. If you're writing a nonfiction book and it doesn't make your point more clear, edit that part out. Yeah, it's fun, you know, to see like, oh, my character's more of a character because they stopped to wash the dishes in the middle of this place, but if it doesn't add to what your story's trying to convey, it might just get your readers off in some other place and be like, well, what was the point of that? If you put in something that isn't really drive home the point, your readers are going to notice. They're going to say, well, what was the point of that? and it's going to start creating a disconnect with your book. So stick to your plot, stick to your point. If it's not driving home your purpose, your theme, your felt need, go ahead and take it out. And definitely, don't take out everything extra about your characters. There are those little bits in there that just build characterization. Characterization is good to build your characters, to show who they are. That is an added fluff. Don't take that stuff out. But you know, when you read through it, this isn't really necessary. I know a lot of the time, like I said, I was a kid in high school who my teacher had to limit the amount of pages we could write because I always wrote so much. I wrote a 200-page paper in college because I chose to do that. So I would add things that I would just go on something else, you know, because you get an idea and you're like, oh yeah, and that connects to this, and that connects to this. Don't do that. Edit those parts out that just connect to this and connect to this. Stay on the main track. All right. So what do you keep in your book that you're trying to write? Think about, is it necessary? It goes back to kind of what we've been talking about with what to edit out. Keep it in if it is necessary. The more I read and the more I write of Anelthalien's story, there's more than just the first book. As I write the later books, the more I see and I read back through this one, I'm like, wow, that little detail, it so mattered. And this little detail, it so mattered. It doesn't seem like it matters in this book. And sometimes when I write, I'm like, I don't really know why we're doing this right now, God. But then a couple pages later, or a couple books later, I'm like, that mattered so much. Wow. And so if you're a normal kind of author, normal, you know, we're not normal. But if you're a more normal kind of author that does actually know what's going to happen in their book before they write it, think about, is what you're putting in now going to be pertinent to what happens later? Is it going to connect? Is this little tiny detail actually building up the character, or is it just because you thought it'd be cool? Is this little tiny detail important to the story, or is it just you kind of being like, I need to describe more, I need to do something more? Don't put something in just because you feel like you need to make it sound like something, because you feel like you need to make it look like something. Don't go by feeling. Go by what you know, what you've planned, what you know to be true, and what you know to be right, and the purpose of why you set out to write. Okay. I talked about that. Well, the little hints about characters become a big deal later. That's what I've noticed in my book. So the little hints about characters, those are good. Those build characterization. Keep those in. The little moments that develop overall relationships. There's a couple moments in my book that look just like, why is this happening? But then later you see why that was so important for this character relationship later. Just like a thing of skipping rocks together. You're like, why does this matter that they're skipping rocks right now? But you see, it builds their relationship, and it's necessary for the next step in the relationship of the characters. And little offhand comments that match something that arises as a huge issue later. I was reading through my third book, and I noticed this little offhand comment that gets cut off in the middle of it. But in the fifth book that I'm writing right now, God just showed me this, like, whoa, this is going to happen. And it connected to that little comment. And I had just written it not knowing why. But now that little offhand comment means so much. And because I included it here, I mean, it connects your story when you have those little moments. So don't take out the little moments that connect to something bigger later. Because those are the things that, like, man, they blow your reader's mind. I know when I read Harry Potter and like J.K. Rowling connected like one little detail in the first book and then it became a big deal in the 8th book, I was like, she's the best author ever! So keep in those little moments that connect to something else and make something later more important, more whole, more full. Okay, my last thing I put on there, don't say, oh, this feels good, I like this. Don't keep that in there. If it's not necessary, go ahead and edit it out. Alright, so the second part of editing is the grammar and spelling and syntax, and like I said, I really enjoyed that in high school. I thought it was lots of fun to make sentences sound better and to make different sentence orders and sentence structures, and so I really enjoyed that, and I kind of do that naturally as I write anything, because I had a really hard English teacher in high school and she hammered it into us. So I do it naturally, and that's what you need to do. You need to get someone to help you learn this, whether it be a teacher, whether it be you go online and teach yourself. So you just start naturally writing better. Well, I'll tell you how. So, tips for having just better sentence structure, better words. Have a subject and use action verbs. That sounds like duh, but sometimes you know what you're talking about, but your audience doesn't know what you're talking about. And so you may start writing a sentence and you forget to say who you're referring to, and you just put he or she because in your head you know. So make sure you clearly communicate who your subject is. And sometimes in sentences, when you're writing and you know who it is, you just go ahead and put a sentence without really naming a subject. My poor husband, he does this a lot because he writes nonfiction papers for his master's class. And he doesn't address his subject. I think that's what I get the most marks in his papers for. Who is doing this? Who is doing the action? Make sure you indicate who is doing the action. In fiction, it's easier than nonfiction. And use action verbs. The passive verbs are be, am, is, are, was, and were. Saying, like, the wall is green, instead of saying the wall looked green. It's just a small difference, but when you use those passive verbs, they make the sentence less rich, less full. When you use the action verbs, when you use the verbs that tell what something is doing, instead of what something just is, it sounds a lot, it describes it better to your readers. They get a more full picture. Okay. And my next one goes along with this. Vary your verbs. I know this was one thing I did do in Anelthalien. When I was reading through it, and when I was reading through my second one that I'm typing out right now, I wrote said a lot, like Kendall said this, Kendall said that, Tad said this, Andrew said this. And I was like, why am I doing like this? I have been taught better. And so I looked through, and in each one I refused to put said. I did it in my first book, but I'm refusing in my second book to put just said. How do they say it? Don't just write verbs that are often used like said or walk. Don't reuse those over and over and over. I've read books, like good books, that just say so-and-so said, so-and-so said, and it gets redundant, and it gets like, okay, they said this. How did they say it? You don't know how to read it. When you're the author, you have to describe to your reader kind of how to read it. Like, did they say it quietly? Because even if you just put an adverb with your verb of how they said it, like quietly said or loudly said, that helps too. Go for varying your verbs instead of just using the same verb over and over and over again. And it sounds so simple, but it's also so simple to just revert back to, okay, this person said this. When you're trying to just get your book out and just write sometimes, it gets to where you use the same word over and over. Avoid that. When you go back and edit through, get your thesaurus out. I love thesauruses. and see synonyms and look up different words that describe it better. I really like etymology and looking up the meaning of words, but that's another topic. And seeing what it's not really a different topic. And seeing what it really, really means, getting down to the depths, instead of just saying, Kendall said this, think about how she said it and what word best conveys how she said it. And then use that word. And you can just like layer all kinds of meaning when you get into etymology and everything like that. It's super fun. All right. So vary your sentence structure also. Don't just use the same length of sentence. Don't just use long, complex, over and over. That wears your readers out. If you just use short, choppy sentences, it gets this rushed feel and kind of, even if it's not an anxious part, it will either feel really boring or really anxious. You know, Kendall said this, Tad said that. It sounds kind of like an argument. They said this, they said that. Whenever you're doing scenes that you want your reader to feel more anxious, more, can't think of my words now. Talking about words, I can't think of my words. When you want your reader to feel the action that's going on, the intense action that's going on, there's my word. Use shorter sentences. Whenever it's more of a long, flowing, calm scene, use longer sentences. But make sure to vary your sentence structure depending on what you want to convey. And read it out loud to really see if you're getting a good pace, a good flow. Because sometimes while you're writing, you'll just, like with the verbs, like with other words, you just get into using the same thing because your mind just goes into autopilot. But read it out loud when you go through and edit it. And does it sound like everything is the same? And then it gets monotonous, then it gets repetitive, then it gets just kind of like this sing-song thing, and people get bored with that. Make sure you vary your sentence structure. Use compound sentences, use complex sentences, use, what are they called? Phrases, and all those different fun things. If you want a website to help you out, OWLpurdue, OWLpurdue. That's what that crazy hard English teacher told us to use. That's what I still go to. That has grammar rules that you can trust. OWLpurdue. Go to that website and look up different sentence structures. Okay, and go to OWLpurdue for commas. Commas are the bane of my existence. Commas are difficult for me because I either think, oh man, I'm using them too much, or I'm not using them enough, and there's so many comma rules. So make sure that you know your comma rules. Put commas in between to a complex sentence that has a subject and a verb over here and a subject and a verb over here. Put a comma in between your conjunction. And know all your other comma rules. Make sure you have commas in between your phrases and the main sentence, and there's tons. Go to OWLpurdue, look up if you have a question, and make sure to use commas correctly. It's difficult. I probably have mistakes in my book because it's difficult for me, but the good thing about commas is most people don't know proper comma rules. So if you make a few mistakes there, the world isn't going to blow up. Commas are hard. And prepositions is another thing to watch. A lot of the time when we talk, we use prepositions that aren't necessarily correct grammatically. Like, I say off of. I use double prepositions when I talk, and the editor for Elm Hill caught all of those, and I was like, I didn't even know that was wrong. And so we often use prepositions wrong because that's just how people talk, and we pick up those colloquialisms. But make sure that you're using them properly when you write. Another pitfall of prepositions is to misuse the right preposition. My husband he's from the South, and they speak their own language in the South. And so he's picked up a lot of phrases that have incorrect prepositions. And he says of a morning a lot. And in my mind I hear of a morning, and I'm like, no, because he'll talk about, I wake up of a morning. And I'm like, when something's of something, it's a part of something. And so you wake up in a part when you're in a part. It doesn't make sense. But he says it because it makes sense to him, because that's what he's learned growing up. And so if you've learned a preposition going up, you may not know that it's wrong. So that's where the next tip will come in when I do additional tips of how to know if it is right or not. That's having someone else read it. But before I go on to that, I want to tell you the last thing about this second part of grammar. There's a sentence that teacher taught me in high school. The sentence is, there are a lot of things you gotta do. Don't use sentences like that. Don't use that word. There, only use the word there to mean that place. A lot of people use the word there to mean some vague subject. And it's vague. It doesn't help your readers see the picture. It doesn't help convey what you're trying to convey. Only use there if you're talking about, I went over there. I went to that place. Don't say, there are a lot of things you gotta do. Don't use it as the subject unless you're talking about a place. The are, I already talked about how are is a passive verb. A lot and things, and yeah, in the sentence, a lot and things, those are vague words. Things is the most vague word in the English language, I think. Don't just stick a word in there if you don't know what word to stick in there. I sometimes when I'm writing and I can see it in my head, but I can't quite get it. And so I'll write a word, but then I'll circle it to know when I go back later, that's not the word that I need to use. I need to look up something else. I need to think about it again. So don't just put in a word when you don't know what to put, because things is really easy, especially in like my husband's metaphysical papers, how he talks about things exist in the world. I'm like, don't put that. What things? And it's hard in that area because you're talking about literally an indescribable entity. But still, you can use entity. You can use being. You can use something like that instead of just thing. Thing can mean anything. Don't use vague words. And then the gotta, do, don't use slang words. Don't use colloquialisms unless you are writing dialogue. Then go for it. My characters say gotta and they leave off parts of their words, but that builds character. You, as your writer, as your narration, writing your book, don't use slang words. Alright, so that takes care of the grammar part. A couple additional tips that really help. Read it out loud to yourself. Go through your manuscript as you edit and read it out loud. It's a little awkward, but do it. It will help you hear the pace. It will help you hear the flow. It will help you hear if there's any awkward sentences so you can fix that. Then read it out loud to someone else. So you can ask if it makes sense, the flow of the book, the theme of the book, and if it captivates them. Because I really like reading to my husband, because every now and then he'll stop me and he'll say, I really liked that part. I really liked how you did this. And you'll never know those little parts in your book unless you read it out loud to someone before you publish it. Because if you read it to someone else and they don't seem interested, they don't seem into it, then you'll know that you have to go back and do some editing. But if they seem really into it, if they just close their eyes and picture it and just totally zone out from everything else, you'll know you're on the right track. And ask them what they liked and what they disliked after you get done with a chapter or section or whatever, so they can give you feedback. And then let someone else read it. Just give the manuscript to someone else you trust so they don't run away with it and copy it and steal your manuscript. Let someone else read it that you trust. A lot of people use beta readers. I looked that up. It means unpaid test readers that are not professionals, so they can give the opinion of an average reader. I did this and didn't know it was a beta reader. I had just one of my friends from church who was a retired teacher do this. She read through it. She was an educated person. She liked to read. And so I was like, will you read this? And she said, sure. And she was able to catch some mistakes that I hadn't caught. She was able to tell me what she thought of it. And so, I mean, this doesn't have to be any kind of special professional person. Just a person who likes to read in your life. Ask them to read it. Try to get someone who's going to give you positive critiques. Someone who won't just say, oh yeah, it's good, yeah, just because they like you and don't want to hurt your feelings. But also someone who, in the critiques, they won't say, well, it was just bad and I didn't like it, you should just give up. Get someone who will give you positive, helpful critiques. If you still are in high school, maybe a teacher, if you still have a good connection to a teacher, an English teacher who can really catch those commas for you. Commas. So those are my tips. First of all, think about what is necessary when editing the content. Is this really necessary to my plot, to moving it forward? And if it isn't, edit it out. Second, the grammar, the syntax, all that stuff. Don't be vague. Don't be vague when you actually write. That's the main point of it. Be very specific. Get at what you're really trying to say with your words and with your sentence structure. Because sentence structure can convey a feeling to your reader. Like I said, the shorter sentences, a more rapid pace. The longer sentences, there's more ease in there. There's more describing there. And then the third main thing is to read it out loud to yourself and let other people hear it too before you go and actually publish it. So those are my editing tips. I hope you learned a lot, and I will see you next time. Bye. Hi, if you want to know more about Anelthalien, please follow me on Instagram. Check out my Facebook page, please subscribe to my YouTube channel or visit my website at HAPruitt.com. Thanks for watching!